Close your eyes for a moment and let the world around you loosen its grip. Feel the soft weight of the air, the gentle temperature of your room, the familiar stillness that holds your thoughts in place. Now imagine that stillness stretching outward, thinning, blending with a kind of ancient quiet that once blanketed a world far older than your own. It's a quiet that isn't empty, but alive, filled with the slow pulse of time itself. Somewhere beneath that silence, you sense the first faint suggestion of movement. Coarse sand sliding under your feet, the breath of a distant wind drifting across a forgotten plain, and the echo of footsteps that aren't yet yours, but are about to be. When you finally open the inner eye, the one reserved for memory you have never lived, you find yourself standing at the edge of an immense river. Its surface is dark, a ribbon of quiet motion moving under the pale glow of a sky dusted with starlight. The air is cool, almost cold, with that strange purity only ancient nights seem to possess. And as you breathe it in, something inside you settles, as if your mind recognizes this place, even though your body does not. You are somewhere between waking and dreaming, standing in the cradle of the earliest civilization humanity ever built. But you don't know that yet. All you know is the subtle weight of an unseen presence, as if the whisper of history is leaning close, waiting for you to take your first step. The ground under your feet feels grainy, loose, coated with centuries of silt and dust carried by the river's slow exhale. You look ahead into the thin darkness, and faint shapes begin to surface. Shadows of uneven walls, crooked silhouettes made of earth. Something that resembles a gate, yet feels older than the concept of gates itself. It is the outline of a city, but not the kind that grows from steel or glass or anything that reflects light. This one absorbs it, drinks it, holds it. You stand there a moment longer, letting your eyes adjust to the ancient palette of browns, ashen grays, and shadows so deep they seem like wells. The night presses gently against your shoulders, urging you forward, and you take a step. The sand shifts with a dry whisper. You take another, and suddenly the city ahead feels less like a ruin and more like a living organism waiting patiently for your arrival. This is your entry. But you are not just walking into Sumer. You are drifting into a threshold where the earliest human stories touch something stranger, something older, something that has refused to fade despite 4,000 years of weather, conquest, and forgetfulness. And as you approach, the question you didn't know was forming begins to take shape, delicate and electric at the back of your mind. Why does this place feel like it remembers you? A faint breeze brushes against your face. It smells faintly of clay, damp, mineral-rich, sun-baked and cooled again, as if the earth itself has been cycling through breaths for millennia. You step closer to the dark outline of the city, and the first real detail emerges from the blur. A long, low wall of compacted mud brick. Some bricks are cracked, some melted by time, some still holding the precise fingerprint of the hands that shaped them. The wall is rough, uneven, patched in places by different eras. It rises no higher than the height of a person, but its presence feels larger, almost ceremonial, like a threshold drawn not to intimidate, but to invite. You pause before crossing it. Not because something stops you, but because something inside you wants to take in the moment. The strange sense that you are standing exactly where millions of unnamed people once stood. People who pressed their palms to the same kind of clay, breathed the same river-cooled air, and looked up at the same impossible sky. A sky so clear it feels like glass, revealing stars so sharp they look as if they could cut you. You move forward and cross the threshold. The world within the city opens slowly, as if revealing itself in carefully alternating breaths. There is no roar of life here, no crowds, no merchants, no rising sun. Only a deep, organic quiet that hums with its own rhythm. It's the kind of quiet that cities in your world have long forgotten. A quiet that once allowed people to hear not just the world, but their own thoughts. Thoughts that shaped myths, laws, inventions, and perhaps something far stranger. You walk along a narrow path of packed earth. On either side, low houses rise like sleeping animals. Simple, rectangular structures built from the same clay brick material, their edges softened by time. Their roofs are flat, stacked with layers of reed matting, and in the night air, they radiate the stored heat of the day. You feel it as you pass, a soft warmth lingering like a sigh. The scent of the river begins to fade behind you, replaced by something more intimate, a faint aroma of baked grain lingering from communal ovens, a slightly sweet note of crushed herbs left to dry by some unseen hand. And beneath it all, the firm, grounding smell of earth. These layers of scent build themselves into a subtle architecture of their own, one that envelops you as naturally as air. As you walk deeper into the city, you feel a shift, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The space around you feels thicker, heavier, dense with the unspoken memory of 1,000 rituals. You don't know what those rituals were, but your footsteps seem to echo them. And with every step, something inside you becomes more aware of a truth that is yet to present itself. You are not exploring a city, you are revisiting a blueprint. The quiet presses deeper. It is not total, there are small interruptions. A quiet rustle of reeds outside the walls. A faint drip of water collecting in a gutter-like groove. The soft crunch of your own footsteps on dust. But the city itself makes no sound. It rests, waiting, as if holding its breath for you. You stop walking for a moment, letting the silence settle. In that pause, the first subtle question forms inside you. Just a whisper, but undeniable. What kind of people built all this? Long before the world had words to describe itself. Your mind drifts as you walk, not aimlessly, but guided by something in the air, a thread of possibility, a memory that does not belong to you, yet feels familiar. You imagine the hands that shaped these streets, hands calloused from labor, but precise, methodical. You picture the eyes of the scribes who would sit under low lamplight, pressing the angled tip of a stylus into wet clay to trap thoughts that would outlive empires. You feel the presence of those who tended the fires, who raised the walls, who ground grain in rhythm with the rising sun. And behind them all, you sense something. Someone else. A shadow. A rumor woven into the clay tablets and temple hymns. A presence the Sumerians themselves whispered about while kneading dough or hauling water. You feel it before you understand it. There is weight here. Not physical, but something deeper. A weight on the soul of the city, like a memory trying to resurface. You continue forward until the narrow street widens into a small courtyard. A stillness settles over the space, deeper than the silence you've heard so far. You pause, letting your eyes adjust once again. The courtyard feels uncanny. Not dangerous, not threatening, but charged, as if 1,000 unseen stories converge in this exact spot, overlapping like translucent layers of time. It's here, for the first time, that you feel the faintest tug towards something distant, yet intimately near. A kind of gravitational pull, not of mass, but of narrative. The sense that you are being drawn forward toward an answer the city has held for millennia. Yet the answer has not been given. Only the pull. A question begins to form, but it does not shape itself into words. It lingers as an instinct, a sensation you can't fully grasp. Whatever it is, it urges you to keep walking. And so you do. Your path narrows again, curving gently left, then right, like a vein of the city's circulatory system, carrying you deeper and deeper. The houses thin, the shadows stretch. The air grows cooler. And suddenly, without warning, the space before you opens again. Not into a courtyard, but into something larger. Something vast enough that your breath pauses in your throat. In the darkness ahead, the silhouette rises. You don't see the full structure yet. You see only its enormous outline, a colossus made of angled steps and sloping walls that swallow the starlight rather than reflect it. It is too large to comprehend in one glance, too ancient to belong entirely to the realm of humans. You stand at the edge of its shadow, and the night seems to deepen around you. The ziggurat towers above the sleeping city, not merely as a building, but as a declaration, a monument, a question carved into the earth. And for the first time tonight, a faint tremor of awe moves through your chest. Your feet begin to move toward it almost without your permission, as if the pull you felt earlier has finally found its destination. Each step draws you deeper into the shadow it casts across the ground, a shadow so old it feels like it has seeped into the soil itself. You stop at the base, craning your neck upward until your vision blurs at the height. It is breathtaking, impossible, terrifying in its scale, not because of what it reveals, but because of what it implies. No ordinary devotion built this. No simple ritual required it. No passing generation could have conceived it. This is something else. A question rises inside you, sharper now, more complete. If the people of this ancient land built this for their gods, then who or what were those gods? The night offers no answer, only the quiet. And in that quiet, you realize something unsettling. The mystery is already awake, and it has noticed you. You remain at the base of the impossible structure longer than you intended, caught between the urge to climb and the instinct to simply stand there and absorb its presence. The ziggurat looms so massively above you that it begins to alter your sense of scale, as if the world has been quietly reshaped around its gravity. You feel small here, but not insignificant. Instead, you sense that your presence has been accounted for, as if this place was built with the expectation that someday someone like you would arrive, drawn by curiosity, guided by something you cannot yet name. The night folds itself around you, gentle but insistent, pressing you to move. You take a step back from the towering wall of mud brick, letting your eyes travel along its steep face. The brickwork is irregular in places, smoothed in others. Not because of imperfection, but because of age. An age that outstrips entire civilizations. You trace the outline of one brick with your gaze, imagining the hand that placed it, the intent behind it, the rhythm of ancient labor, guided perhaps by priests or by something far less human. Your awareness shifts. You begin to realize that this city wasn't arranged haphazardly. Every street, every courtyard, every threshold you walked through seemed to lead you here, as if the entire urban layout was designed to funnel attention, bodies, rituals, and now even your thoughts toward this monumental core. There is purpose woven into the geometry of the place, subtle but deliberate, the way a heart sits at the center of a living body. For a long moment, you find yourself wondering what it must have felt like to approach this ziggurat when it was new, when its edges were sharp, when its facade gleamed under moonlight, and when crowds filled the streets with reverent anticipation. You imagine torches carried in long ceremonial lines, chants rising in unison, the weight of expectation settling over thousands of people gathered at the base, all of them lifting their eyes to the structure, waiting, not for a symbolic blessing, but for a literal arrival. That thought lingers as you take a slow breath and step backward into the darkness of the street you came from. The city seems to close around you once again, not hostile, but intimate, like walking through a memory that has chosen to welcome you. You retrace your steps, not out of fear or reluctance, but because something within you urges deeper exploration before you attempt the ascent. The ziggurat is not just a monument, it is a destination. And some destinations require context. As you leave its shadow, the city's details emerge once more with newfound clarity. The mud brick walls are not merely construction, they are sedimented layers of intention. You begin to see subtle differences in brick composition, thickness, color variations that hint at renovations done over centuries, each era layering its own story atop the previous one. Some walls have been reinforced with darker material, bitumen, the sticky substance used as adhesive and waterproofing, glistening faintly even in the low light. You run your fingers lightly along one such seam, sensing the faint stickiness that never quite disappears. Bitumen binds the city together, not just physically, but metaphorically. It is the connective tissue, a kind of ancient tech that allowed this civilization to rise beyond what should have been possible with the tools they had. And as you touch it, the thought flits across your mind that maybe they didn't do it alone. You pull your hand away slowly, aware of the scent it carries, something sharp and earthy, a scent that feels like the residue of deep time. And you wonder how many other hands touched the same substance, how many laborers mixed it, how many engineers, if that is even the right word, tested its limits. Your footsteps guide you toward a narrower alley, one that curves toward the inner districts of the city. The houses become more compact, stacked closely like cells in a hive. Their flat rooftops form terraces that would have once served as sleeping spaces during sweltering nights. You imagine families climbing ladders to lie beneath the stars, whispering myths about the beings who walked among them, pointing at constellations named after gods whose personalities seemed more human than divine. You keep moving. Something draws you on, something quiet but insistent. The alley widens just enough for you to breathe. You look up and see the outline of yet another structure, different from the homes, lower than the ziggurat, but marked by an aura of importance. Its doorway is tall and narrow, framed by bricks that have been smoothed by the passing of countless hands. You step inside without hesitation. The temperature changes instantly. It is cooler here, almost cold, the kind of cold that suggests thick walls and vaulted spaces. Your breath slows as your eyes adjust to the faint light filtering in from a high slit along the wall. You recognize the space in a way that is difficult to explain. You do not know its name, but you know its purpose. This is a place of thought. Rows of shelves line the walls, shelves not built from wood or metal, but from clay itself. They hold rectangular tablets stacked neatly, some lying flat, others propped at angles, each one carrying a story, a law, a record, or a fragment of something that shaped the world outside. These tablets are heavy not just in weight, but in meaning, the physical embodiment of collective memory before paper existed. You move deeper into the chamber, feeling the air thicken with the presence of knowledge. The floor beneath you is hard, almost polished by the passage of generations of scribes. You imagine their footsteps echoing through this room as they carried damp clay slabs to workbenches, pressing styluses into them with meticulous care. The thought forms slowly. This room is not just an archive, it is an engine, a machine, a hub of information processing, long before such concepts had names. You approach one of the shelves and lift a tablet carefully. It rests cool and surprisingly heavy against your palms. You run your thumb lightly across the ridges of cuneiform script pressed into its surface. The wedge-shaped impressions feel precise, almost mechanical in their clarity. And yet, they are profoundly human. Each mark represents a choice made by a person trying to preserve something meaningful enough to carve into clay. You try to imagine the scribe who created it, a young apprentice learning the craft, an elder scholar responsible for documenting an event that could not afford to be forgotten, a priest astronomer tracking the movement of heavenly bodies, a tax collector recording grain distribution, or perhaps, just perhaps, someone tasked with copying information they themselves did not understand. Words dictated by individuals whose nature has been lost to history. You don't know what this particular tablet says, but the sensation of holding it stirs something deeper. It feels like a message left in a bottle by a civilization reaching across the centuries, asking anyone who finds it to listen carefully, to consider what survives when everything else fades. You return the tablet to its place, aligning it with care, almost reverence. Then you step back and let your gaze sweep across the room again, absorbing the sheer volume of encoded knowledge stored here. You can feel the weight of it, not as burden, but as presence. A presence that vibrates faintly beneath the surface of your awareness, like a low-frequency hum only your mind can detect. For a moment you wonder, how did they learn all this? How did they build a system of writing so sophisticated? How did they develop mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, law, all within such a brief window of time in the grand span of human history? The question hovers in your mind, delicate and unsettling. You have read the explanations. You know what scholars say about gradual development, about cumulative innovation, about small clusters of settlement that grew until they became cities. And yet, standing here among these tablets, staring at the precise geometry of the script, you feel a quiet resistance to that explanation. It isn't disbelief, it's something subtler. The sense that the truth may be larger, stranger, more layered than the tidy narratives presented in textbooks. Your footsteps carry you deeper into the chamber until you reach the far wall. Here, the shelves rise higher, the tablets thicker. These are the heavy records, the ones that would have required several people to carry. You tilt your head back to look at them, feeling the sheer mass of history stacked above you. And again, that faint, familiar pull. You reach out and touch the edge of one tablet. Its surface is rougher, the inscriptions deeper, carved with force rather than pressed. These older tablets feel different, closer to the bone of something ancient, primal, raw. As if they were not written for people like you, but simply preserved by people like you. A thought stirs at the edges of your consciousness. It comes and goes before you can grasp it, leaving only a trace of curiosity, a question that feels both premature and inevitable. What story were they trying to preserve so desperately? You take a slow breath and let the thought dissolve. There is time. The city is patient. You turn and leave the chamber, stepping back into the warm embrace of the night air. It feels different now. Not heavier or lighter, but more aware. As if the act of reading the past, or attempting to, has shifted something subtle in the present. You walk toward the main street again, and for the first time you realize how seamlessly the city guides you. There are no signs, no directions, no prompts. But the layout itself seems to suggest a path. You follow it without resistance, letting your curiosity lead you toward the next turn, the next opening, the next layer of the story. You pass by a house with a doorway framed by reed matting. Another house stands beside it with a slightly taller wall, etched faintly with symbols that may be decorative or may be functional. You notice that some houses are aligned perfectly with the cardinal directions, while others sit at slight angles, as if adjusted by the shifting priorities of different eras. And as you walk, you sense an undercurrent, a design philosophy. Something about this place feels intentional on a level that transcends simple urban planning. It feels almost coded, as if the city itself was a kind of message, a declarative sentence written in streets and walls. You slow your pace, absorbing these subtle patterns, and gradually the noise within your own mind quiets into something more focused. You begin to see the city not as a cluster of buildings, but as a system, an organism with temples for bones, courtyards for lungs, and tablets for neurons. You keep walking until the street opens once more into a wider space. It is not a plaza, not quite. It feels more like a staging ground, a place designed for gathering, for preparing, for transitioning. You stand at its center and look around. The ziggurat towers again in the distance, but now from a different angle. You see the full length of the grand staircase leading toward its summit. You see platforms that once served purposes you can only guess at. And suddenly, inexplicably, you feel the weight of the city's expectation pressing gently against your spine. This place wants to be understood, not by scholars or archaeologists or theories alone, but by you, here, now. A whisper forms at the deepest part of your awareness, a whisper not of words, but of intent. You cannot interpret it yet, but you know it is real. And as you stand there, letting that sensation settle into you, one quiet truth begins to crystallize. You haven't come here to visit a ruin. You've come to retrace a path millions followed before you. A path built on clay and silence, leading towards something that refuses to stay buried. The night holds its breath, and the mystery waits. You stand in the open space for a moment longer, letting the presence of the ziggurat settle into your awareness. The immense structure, still distant yet impossibly large, anchors everything around it. The houses, the pathways, the city itself. Even the night sky seems arranged in relation to it, as if the stars were drawn into alignment by the gravitational pull of something built from nothing more than clay and intention. A slow breath leaves your chest as you take your first step toward it. Not the hesitant step of a curious visitor, but the quiet, deliberate movement of someone who senses they are crossing into a deeper chamber of a story that has been waiting for them. Your foot touches the packed earth, and the faintest pulse of recognition travels through you. Not memory, something older than memory, a resonance. The path begins to rise gently as you move closer. The houses fade behind you, swallowed by the darkness like thoughts drifting out of reach. The air grows cooler, the streets wider. And suddenly you find yourself standing at the base again, staring at the first of the stepped terraces that lead toward the top. But this time, you see something new. The ziggurat isn't simply tall. It is layered, composed of several massive tiers, each one serving as both a platform and a boundary, a separation between realms. The structure seems to whisper its own hierarchy. The lowest tier belongs to the ordinary world, the world of farmers, bakers, scribes, children running through dusty streets. The next tier belongs to ritual, to preparation, to the careful movements of priests carrying offerings. And each level above that becomes increasingly abstract, increasingly symbolic, increasingly distant from the concerns of human life. And at the very top? What? Your eyes travel upward, but the summit is swallowed by the night, its edges indistinct, as if the structure refuses to reveal its final purpose until you earn it. You step closer and place your hand on the first block. The clay is cool, smoother than you expected, the surface still faintly bearing the impressions of ancient workers. Some bricks contain tiny ripples, formed when wet clay met early morning air. Others are so worn they feel almost polished. You imagine the sheer number of hands that have touched this spot, generations rising and falling like the river tides, each one leaving a trace of themselves on the structure. You take the first step. It is higher than a modern stair, almost knee-height. Your muscles adjust as you lift yourself onto the platform. And suddenly, the world shifts, subtle but clear. The ground feels farther away, the city feels smaller, and the structure beneath you feels alive. Not in a biological sense, but in the way a massive piece of architecture becomes an extension of the land itself. You take another step, then another. The ascent is slow, deliberate. The stairs stretch ahead like a pilgrimage, designed to test not your body, but your patience, your breath, your willingness to confront the weight of meaning. You climb until you reach the first terrace, a wide platform that extends in both directions like a walkway around the perimeter. You stand still, letting your breath settle. From here, the city looks different. You see the pattern of the streets more clearly. Houses cluster in shapes that resemble constellations. Courtyards line up like syllables in a forgotten sentence. The river gleams faintly beyond the walls, a live corridor of movement carving its way through the land. It's only when you take a step forward that you notice the feature you missed before. Along the edge of the terrace, nearly invisible at first glance, are a series of small indentations carved into the bricks. Not random erosion, not damage. They are intentional. You run your fingers along one and feel its precise shape. Angular, deliberate, almost like the early prototype of a symbol. Something between writing and engineering. A question rises inside you, and this time it does shape itself into words. What function did this platform serve? Not symbolically, practically. You walk along the edge, tracing the faint markings with your fingertips, sensing a pattern you cannot decode yet. These lines, these indentations, why here? Why at this height? You continue until the markings fade into worn surfaces, then begin again further along. The repetition is too consistent to be aesthetic, too subtle to be decorative. It feels almost utilitarian. A quiet thought forms. What if this place wasn't simply a temple? What if it was designed to interface with something? The word interface feels anachronistic here, yet fitting. This is a structure of joints, platforms, terraces, components. The deeper you look, the more it resembles a system. A piece of infrastructure from an era without machines. You pause, letting that idea settle into you with its strange mixture of awe and unease. Your eyes lift toward the next tier. The staircase steepens as it winds upward, and you begin your ascent again. This time, your body feels lighter, as though anticipation has replaced weight. It's not adrenaline. It's something quieter, a sense of being drawn, of belonging. As you reach the second platform, a strange feeling washes through you. Here, the air feels different. You can't explain how. There is no visible change, no shift in temperature, but the sensation is unmistakable. It is as if you have crossed from the mundane into the threshold of something ceremonial, something deliberately set apart. Here, you can almost feel the footprints of priests who walked this terrace long ago. Not because you see them, but because the space itself holds their memory. You can imagine them carrying vessels of oil or bowls of grain, chanting hymns in the early light of dawn. And behind their movements, you sense the shadow of intention. Rituals designed not merely to honor gods, but perhaps to signal them. You stop at the center of the terrace, turning inward, letting your mind drift into that old rhythm. The Sumerians didn't build symbols for their own sake. They built tools. They built conduits. They built structures that existed not just in the physical world, but in the conceptual one. Bridges between realms. This ziggurat, in its layered geometry and deliberate orientation, feels like a device created to harmonize earth and sky, body and spirit, human and something other than human. Your heart beats once, slow and deep. A question forms more clearly now, rising like a bubble through water. What did they expect to descend here? You stand in silence, letting the question echo inside you. For a moment, it feels like the entire structure is listening with you. Then you continue upward. The stairs grow narrower as you climb, the platforms smaller. The distance between the earth and the sky grows shorter with each tier. You are leaving the world of ordinary people behind, moving into a space where only a chosen few, priests, kings, messengers, once stood. Halfway up, you pause. From here, the ground seems impossibly far away. The city stretches out like a living map, every detail visible, every street a vein, every courtyard a heartbeat. You realize that up here, perspective changes. You see what ordinary people never saw. You see the world not from the viewpoint of a citizen, but from that of someone perched at the hinge between heaven and earth. You take a slow breath. Perhaps that was the point. You climb again, reaching the next platform. This one feels different from the others. The bricks here are smoother, almost refined. You run your hand along the surface and feel faint impressions. Lines that look like stylus marks, but arranged differently than cuneiform. Less linguistic, more schematic, almost like early blueprints. An unexpected thought rises. What if this wasn't just a holy place, but a workspace? A site of coordination, calculation, observation. You imagine priests standing here at dawn, charting the movements of planets, tracking stars as they slid across the sky. You imagine them carving records on tablets below, using this vantage point as a cosmic measuring tool. The precision of Sumerian astronomy begins to feel less mysterious, not miraculous, not accidental, intentional. You realize that from this height, the horizon aligns perfectly with distant points on the landscape, perhaps mountains, perhaps celestial markers, perhaps coordinates. You don't know, but the alignment is too perfect to ignore. Another thought rises, more daring than the last. What if this place was a signal tower, a ladder between realms, a stage on which ancient rituals communicated not only with gods, but with something that might once have descended from the open sky? You take another step. The final staircase rises before you. It isn't tall, but it feels monumental, as if each step compresses centuries of meaning, each one representing a threshold crossed by countless lives. Your hand brushes the wall beside you. The clay feels warmer here, as if the sun that has long since set still lingers in the pores of the structure. Or perhaps the warmth is something else, something generated within you as you approach the summit. Your foot touches the top platform. Your breath leaves you in a slow exhale. The space at the summit is small, almost intimate. A square platform with low walls on three sides and an open view toward the vast sweep of the sky. You step forward, drawn toward the center. The wind brushes lightly against your face, carrying the faint scent of earth and distance. You stand still. This is where kings once stood, where priests offered incense, where entire cities turned their eyes in expectation, where myths were anchored in ceremonies that have long since faded, where something, if the stories hold even a fragment of truth, might once have descended, greeted, commanded, or simply watched. You don't know what they saw. You don't know what they believed. You only know that standing here, the distance between the human and the divine feels unnervingly thin. You let the silence settle. The stars stare back at you with ancient indifference. And in that quiet, a realization emerges, subtle at first, then sharp enough to take hold. This structure wasn't built only for worship. It wasn't built only for power. And it wasn't built only for beauty. It was built to reach something, or to welcome something, or to interface with something that once mattered enough to reshape the earliest stories humanity ever wrote. You breathe slowly as the truth brushes against the edges of your awareness. Standing here, at the spine of the ancient world, you feel the weight of all the unanswered questions pressing gently against you. And yet, the mystery doesn't feel threatening. It feels patient, as if it has been waiting for a very long time. You linger at the summit longer than you expected, letting the thin air wrap around you like a question that has not yet decided how it wants to be asked. The ziggurat beneath your feet feels impossibly old, but not fragile. Its age is not decay, it is endurance. A quiet declaration that some structures were never intended to be understood in a single generation, or even 10. A faint shiver moves along your spine, not from the wind, but from the overwhelming notion that you are standing in the exact space where the boundary between myth and lived memory once thinned to the width of a breath. You close your eyes, and for a moment the centuries collapse. Not through imagination, but through a strange sense that the stones remember. When you open your eyes again, the world shifts. You begin your descent. Not downward, at least not at first. The mind often chooses its own direction before the feet follow, and yours turns inward, wandering through questions that have been quietly forming since you stepped onto the first terrace. These questions feel less like curiosities and more like gentle compulsions. as if the structure itself has been guiding your thoughts toward a deeper layer of something buried. Not in the clay beneath you, but in the story that has defined everything built around it. You step down onto the next terrace, and as your foot touches the surface, the memory of those ancient indentations returns. They pull at your awareness like a thread you forgot you were holding. You kneel beside one of the faint impressions, studying it with more intention this time. The shape is too regular to be decorative, too quiet to be ceremonial, too utilitarian to be symbolic. You trace it with your fingertip and sense the whisper of a purpose that refuses to fully surface. You straighten slowly and take another step downward. The rhythm of your descent begins to mirror the architecture itself. Measured, deliberate, reflective. Each tier you pass feels like shedding a layer of elevation. Not height, but perspective. And then you reach the first wide terrace, where the city opens itself before you again. Something pulls your attention sharply. Not the houses, not the streets. Something else. A specific building. Square and unassuming, yet unmistakably deliberate in its placement. You didn't notice it earlier, but from this angle, from this altitude, it reveals itself with quiet clarity. The House of Tablets. You feel a slow recognition settle into your chest. You know, without having to think, that your journey has not ended at the summit. The summit was merely a vantage point, a lens. The next steps are not upward, but inward, toward a place where stories were carved in clay and sealed in silence. You descend the last of the stairs, stepping onto the earth with a feeling that is almost grounding, though not entirely. Your mind is still somewhere above, perched on the highest tier, contemplating a world shaped by hands that understood something your era has forgotten. As you walk toward the House of Tablets, the street feels narrower than before. The walls loom slightly closer. The air carries a scent of dust mixed with something faintly metallic. You find yourself slowing, not out of hesitation, but because there is something sacred in the proximity of preserved memory. The doorway stands open, as if waiting. You step inside. The transition is immediate. The temperature dips. The air thickens with the smell of clay, ancient clay, the kind that feels as though it has been waiting to be touched, read, decoded. Shelves rise along the walls, heavy with tablets of every size. Some fractured, some perfectly intact, some bearing marks so dense they almost blur into one continuous field. You move deeper into the room. This space feels different from the ziggurat. The ziggurat was a structure reaching upward, reaching out. This place feels inward, enclosing, holding. Where the ziggurat felt like an antenna, this place feels like a hard drive, a repository. Quiet, patient, meticulous. Your hand drifts across the surface of a tablet. The wedge-shaped impressions feel familiar, though you cannot read them. But you can sense the precision behind them, the careful geometry, the intentional spacing. These marks are not accidental. They are the remnants of minds that understood the weight of information, the fragility of memory, the necessity of recording. You lift a tablet gently from the shelf. Its weight surprises you. Not heavy in the physical sense, but heavy in implication. Heavy in the way certain stories are heavy, compressed, condensed, waiting to unfold. You tilt it toward the light. This tablet is different from the ones you saw in the imagined flicker of earlier moments. The marks are sharper, cleaner, and you realize that this is no mythic tale, no cosmic genealogy, no divine feud. This is a list. Numbers, columns, repeating symbols. A structure of counting, of measuring, of tracking something that mattered enough for a scribe to etch it into permanence. But what? Grain rations? Workers? Materials? Celestial cycles? The Sumerians recorded everything, not because they feared forgetting, but because they understood that every piece of the world, every movement of the river, every shift in the sky, every allotment of labor, was part of a system so intricate it demanded constant observation. You place the tablet back with care. A question rises like a slowly brightening ember. How much did they truly know? You move to the next shelf, drawn by a tablet that seems slightly darker than the rest. The clay has an almost oily sheen, as if it absorbed something from the environment as it dried millennia ago. This one is carved more deeply. The symbols feel older, less refined, closer to the raw beginnings of writing. You tilt your head, and the arrangement begins to suggest something familiar. A sequence, a pattern, a cycle. Your mind tries to map it onto something modern, something astronomical or mathematical, and for a moment you sense an uncanny alignment. Not a translation, an echo. A measurement of something that moved with rhythm and precision. You lower the tablet and breathe in the cool, clay-thickened air. The Sumerians did not simply observe the world. They documented it with a level of detail that suggests either an extraordinary natural brilliance or guidance from someone, or something, with a perspective beyond the horizon. Your eyes wander to the far corner of the room. There, you notice a set of tablets shaped differently. Taller, narrower, like the spine of a book that never existed. You approach them slowly. These tablets feel formal, official. Their edges smoother, their lines more deliberate. You pick one up and realize it is a record of a boundary dispute. 2 fields, 2 families. The precise descriptions of the land marked in wedge-shaped text that remains astonishingly clear despite the age. You read the symbols without comprehending their literal meaning, yet you understand the purpose. They weren't just creating civilization. They were maintaining it, administering it, regulating it. And in doing so, they were creating something even more enduring than temples or myths. Bureaucracy. The quiet engine of every civilization, humming beneath the surface. But even this feels like only part of the story. You place the tablet down gently and look around the room again, your eyes scanning the shelves for something that feels different. And you find it. A tablet that does not lie flat. It stands upright, supported by 2 small wedges of clay. Its shape is unusual, wider at the base, narrower at the top, almost like a doorway. You feel a sudden pull toward it, as if the object has been waiting for you to notice. You lift it carefully. The marks on its surface are unlike the others. They curve more often. They repeat in looping clusters. The spacing is irregular, suggesting that whatever is recorded here did not follow the rigid structure of accounting or legal code. It feels like narrative, but not mythology. This is not a story of gods or heroes. It is something else. You trace a symbol near the top. It resembles a star, but not the typical cuneiform star. This one has an elongated tail, curling downward like a streak of motion captured in clay. A comet? A sign? A visitation? Your mind drifts toward the speculative, toward the quiet spaces where history and mystery blend into something that feels both familiar and unsettling. You turn the tablet over. On the back, the markings thin out, leaving a wide, empty space near the bottom. A space where the scribe paused, hesitated, chose not to write, perhaps ran out of room, or perhaps couldn't bring themselves to continue. You place the tablet back on its supports with a care that feels ceremonial. And suddenly, you understand why this place feels so different from the ziggurat. The ziggurat reached upward toward the unknown. The house of tablets reaches inward toward the known. The ziggurat asked questions. These tablets attempted to answer them. But the problem, the quiet, enduring, unsettling problem, is that the more you read, the more the distinction between the two begins to blur. You realize that some tablets are not meant to clarify the past. They are meant to preserve its ambiguity. A soft exhale leaves your lips as your gaze drifts across the shelves once more. Why record this much? Why this obsessiveness? Why this level of detail for a civilization so early in human history? Unless your mind touches a thought you've avoided until now. Unless they were trying to preserve knowledge they did not invent. Knowledge inherited. Knowledge inherited from somewhere else. Knowledge they feared losing if they did not carve it into clay while it was still fresh in their memory. You feel a quiet pressure settle behind your ribs, the weight of an idea that is neither confirmable nor dismissible. An idea that lives precisely in the space where myth softens into metaphor and metaphor hardens into speculation. You leave the tablet where it stands and step back toward the center of the room. The silence thickens around you. Then, something shifts in your awareness, not in the room, not in the air, but in you. A subtle reorientation of perspective. A thought that was forming in fragments suddenly sharpens. There is a difference between a story created and a story recorded. You turn slowly, taking in the room with new eyes. What if these tablets were not just the birth of writing? What if they were the remnants of a civilization attempting to document something older? Something it couldn't fully explain, something it had inherited but never fully understood. The idea settles into you, like a stone slipping into place. And in that quiet realization, a new question rises, one that feels heavier than any tablet in this room. If these were the records of a people trying to preserve inherited knowledge, what happened to the source of that knowledge? You take a slow breath, letting the question echo in the clay-walled room. The air feels still, listening, waiting, holding its breath with you. Then another thought slips in, quieter, sharper, almost like a whisper brushing the back of your mind. The tablets tell stories of gods. But what if the earliest stories were not about worship, but about memory? You stand in the center of the House of Tablets, surrounded by thousands of symbols that speak across time, across worlds, across understanding. And the mystery that has been forming since you approached the ziggurat finally begins to take shape. Slowly, delicately, like something emerging from deep water. You don't say it aloud. You barely think it, but you feel it. Somewhere between the lines of these ancient records, something is waiting to be remembered. The thought lingers like a faint pulse in the air around you. You let the silence hold it, and the journey continues its quiet unfolding. You step away from the upright tablet with a slow, steady breath, feeling the lingering pull of the symbols etched into its surface. It's not only the meaning you can't shake, It's the sensation that something unfinished lives inside those marks, something suspended in time, waiting for the right mind to stumble upon it. A thought occurs to you that feels both impossible and strangely inevitable. Perhaps this story didn't end here. Perhaps what you're reading is only the midpoint of a much longer arc. You let that thought settle as you move deeper between the shelves. Your fingers drift across the edges of tablets at random, brushing the grooves, the sharp lines, the curves that still hold the impressions of a stylus from 4,000 years ago. Every tablet is its own universe, its own careful package of meaning. But together they feel like a network, something interlinked, deliberate, curated with a precision that borders on obsessive. You pause before a cluster of tablets that catch your attention, not because of their shape, but because of their arrangement. They sit together more tightly than the others, as though they belong to one coherent collection. You lift the first one and immediately notice a difference. The symbols are dense, almost frantic, and the spacing tighter than what you've seen so far. You can feel urgency in the strokes, a need to inscribe the information quickly, as though time was short or fear was nearby. You tilt the tablet, and patterns begin to emerge. References to water, to movement, to interruption, to a celestial event of some kind, a disruption in the sky followed by disruption on the ground. Your mind tries to understand the story, but the clay is missing pieces along the edges. Entire lines have been worn away, and your imagination fills the gaps instinctively. You set the tablet down and pick up the next one. This one is clearer. A sequence of symbols suggests the timing of something that happened over several days, rising, diminishing, rising again. Astronomical? Meteorological? Ritualistic? You aren't sure. Then, near the center of the tablet, you notice a symbol repeated twice. A symbol you've seen before. A star with a tail. The same symbol that appeared on the tablet standing upright. A quiet pulse moves through you. This is no list, no accounting record, no legal argument. This is an observation. A description of something that moved across the sky in a pattern that mattered enough to carve into stone. Not mythic language, but observational language. Shape, direction, duration, angle, recurrence, disappearance. Your breath catches softly as a realization emerges. They weren't writing stories. They were writing data. You lift the third tablet in the cluster. It is cracked across the middle, but the markings remain legible. Unlike the others, this one describes not the sky, but the land. Fields bursting with growth, then suddenly failing. Rivers swelling beyond their banks, a rising tension between the predictable rhythm of their environment and something new, something intrusive, something that did not belong. You place the tablet down and exhale slowly. These weren't random events. These were observations linked across the heavens and the earth, measurements of correlation, cause and effect. You look again at the cluster and notice a smaller tablet tucked behind the others. It is thin, almost fragile, and bears only a single line of symbols carved neatly across the surface. A boundary, a marker, a point in time reduced to one line, like someone finally reached the conclusion of their observations, and the only thing left to do was mark the moment that changed everything. You hold the thin tablet for a long moment. It feels like the quiet before a storm. Something inside you whispers that whatever these tablets describe led to consequences so profound that every story, every myth, every ritual echoing through ancient cultures afterward may have been built in response to that single moment. The weight of that thought nudges you gently toward the far side of the room, where the shelves grow older in appearance, the clay darker, the symbols deeper. Some tablets here look as though they were carved with shaking hands, their lines uneven, their spacing erratic. A kind of emotional residue clings to them, fear, perhaps, or awe, or something that sits hauntingly between the two. You lift one of them. The tablet is warm from the room, but something in its texture feels colder than the others. Its symbols are carved with more force, as though the scribe pressed harder out of urgency or desperation. Your eyes scan the marks, and though you cannot read the literal language, the energy behind it is unmistakable. This is no record of daily life. It is a record of alarm. You trace a line with your thumb and feel the impression of the stylus. You wonder what the scribe saw. What compelled them to carve this so deeply, so quickly, as though the future depended on these marks surviving. You set the tablet down gently, aware of the trembling sensation growing at the edge of your thoughts. Your gaze drifts back toward the doorway. You sense something waiting there. Not someone, not a presence, a shift, an invitation. You walk toward it. As you step outside, the air feels different, lighter, but also charged, like the quiet moment between lightning and thunder. The city is still around you, frozen in that eternal twilight of memory, and you begin to walk through it with a new awareness. The houses feel less like abandoned structures reclaimed by history, and more like witnesses, silent but aware. You move through the streets slowly, letting the environment speak to you without words. You notice something you hadn't before. Lines carved into the tops of the threshold stones of several doorways. Lines that mirror the markings on the tablets documenting the celestial streak across the sky. A symbol not meant for decoration, but for communication, or warning. You run your fingers along one of the lines, sensing the age, the intention, the whisper of knowledge hidden within the pattern. A story repeats itself through architecture the same way it repeats through myths, quietly, insistently, without ever revealing its full shape. You continue walking until you reach the edge of the city, where a narrow stairway leads down into a corridor carved into the earth. You hadn't noticed it earlier. It had been shrouded by the shadows cast by the walls. Now it feels as though it is beckoning you, offering not darkness, but depth. You descend slowly. The corridor is cool. The air smells faintly of mineral and ancient moisture. The walls are smooth, too smooth for erosion to explain. This was carved with intention, with tools that were neither primitive nor crude. The corridor bends slightly and then widens into a small chamber. You stop. You feel something in the chamber before you fully see it. A density, a gravity of meaning. Something preserved in the stillness, like a breath held for millennia. You step inside. The chamber is circular, its walls lined with tablets arranged in a deliberate pattern. Not scattered, not stored, displayed. And in the center stands a single column of clay, unmarked, untouched, waiting. You walk around it slowly. It feels wrong to call this a tablet. It is more like a vessel, a container, something designed to hold meaning not in symbols, but in absence. You lay your hand on its surface. It vibrates faintly beneath your fingertips. A hum, or the memory of one. You breathe deeply, and for a moment, the world narrows to a single point. A question rises that you didn't expect, one that feels too precise to have formed on its own. What were they trying to preserve that words could not? You take a step back, noticing for the first time the arrangement of the surrounding tablets. The symbols face inward toward the column, as though every record, every measurement, every line of myth and law and observation was pointing to this silent object at the core. You walk slowly along the wall, reading the impressions without understanding their literal meaning, but sensing the pattern behind them. Mentions of observers, mentions of visitors, mentions of knowledge given and knowledge withheld, mentions of cycles, mentions of return. A swell of unease rises inside you, not fear, but anticipation, like something enormous is hovering just beyond the edges of your comprehension, waiting for you to see its shape. Your fingers brush the last tablet in the ring, and suddenly a thought clicks into place with stunning clarity. The ziggurat reached upward. The house of tablets reached inward. This chamber reaches back. Back toward a time before the first city, before the first scribe, before the first myth. You stand still, allowing the implications to ripple through you. Perhaps the earliest Sumerians didn't create stories of gods arriving from the heavens. Perhaps they remembered them. Perhaps the gods didn't step into myth from imagination, but from history. And when that history faded, the stories remained as distorted echoes of truth. The thought feels outrageous, and yet disarmingly logical. Civilizations don't invent complex myths in their infancy. They inherit them. From oral memories, from remnants, from encounters that their descendants could no longer explain. Your gaze returns to the unmarked column in the center. It stands like a beacon without light, a pillar without inscription, a message whose meaning was never meant to be written. Something inside you stirs. Perhaps some knowledge wasn't meant to be carved into clay. Perhaps some truths weren't allowed to be recorded. Perhaps this, whatever it is, was the only way to preserve what mattered without revealing it to those who weren't ready. Or perhaps a soft whisper moves across your thoughts. Perhaps the one who was meant to understand it hasn't arrived yet. The silence deepens. You feel the boundaries of the chamber, the weight of its purpose, the stillness of its design. And then, like a spark touching dry leaves, a realization ignites. This chamber isn't an archive. It's a signal, a message awaiting activation, a memory structured like a lock, something that needs context, perspective, correlation to decode. Not by the people who made it, but by someone who came much later. You draw a slow breath. The truth doesn't reveal itself. It never does. But the shape of the puzzle becomes clearer than ever. The Sumerians weren't only recording their world. They were preserving someone else's. And you have stepped into the very room where that preservation was hidden, sheltered from erasure, from conquest, from time. You let your hand rest against the column once more. It feels warm now. Or maybe your understanding has shifted enough to feel the echo of significance rather than temperature. Either way, you know one thing with startling clarity. Whatever story the Sumerians inherited, it did not begin with them. And it did not end. Not here. Not anywhere. Not yet. You breathe deeply as the chamber settles around you. The silence is no longer empty. It is full of waiting, full of questions gathering like constellations that only reveal their pattern when viewed from a great enough distance. And you feel, with quiet certainty, that you have just stepped into the earliest outline of a truth that has been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years. A truth that has followed humanity like a shadow. A truth that is ready to wake. You remain in the chamber longer than you intend, standing beside the silent clay column as though it is waiting for something you have not yet realized you are capable of offering. The air feels thick, almost viscous, like time itself has slowed to allow you the space to understand what you've just stepped into. Yet understanding refuses to come all at once. It arrives instead in delicate increments, like a pattern emerging stitch by stitch from a tapestry that has been inverted for centuries. When you finally turn away from the column, the circular arrangement of tablets feels different. Less like an archive, more like the orbit of smaller truths around a central, unspoken one. You pause at the threshold of the chamber, aware that once you cross it, you may not return to this exact frame of mind again. Places like this reshape perception, but only if you let them. You step out into the corridor with a quiet exhale. The passage back to the surface feels longer than before, as if the earth reluctantly releases you, reminding you with each step that what you've seen was not meant for casual eyes. Your fingers brush the wall as you ascend, feeling the subtle lines carved into the clay. Marks so fine they almost disappear beneath your touch. These markings weren't made by accident. They carry the same deliberate geometry you saw on the terraces of the ziggurat, the same pattern of repetition, the same quiet insistence on precision. It occurs to you, halfway up the steps, that the entire city might be encoded in this way. Not just in writing or architecture, but in layout, orientation, proportion. A living diagram, a spatial memory. A system designed to preserve something no single tablet could hold. You emerge into the night air with a sense of disorientation, as though you've surfaced from deep water. The stars feel closer than before, hanging low and heavy over the rooftops. For the first time, you sense the city breathing, not metaphorically, but rhythmically, as though the wind, the walls, the empty spaces between them all share a pulse. You begin walking slowly, allowing your mind to settle into the cadence of the ancient streets. The quiet feels different now. Not the hush of abandonment, but the soft suspension of anticipation. The way a room holds its breath when someone is about to speak. Every shadow has dimension. Every corner feels like a turning page. You can't help but wonder how many people, thousands of years ago, walked these same paths, carrying their own questions, their own interpretations of the world, their own attempts to make meaning of the sky. Your steps lead you toward the broad avenue connecting the ziggurat to the city's inner quarters. You've walked it before, but now the symmetry reveals itself with new clarity. Each stone is aligned along a north-south axis. Each building is placed at a proportional distance from the central structure. The design is mathematical, intentional, almost ceremonial. Not a city built merely for living, but a city built for watching. Watching the sky. You slow your pace. The idea settles into you like a quiet revelation. The patterns in the tablets, the upward reach of the ziggurat, the encoded geometry in the walls. Everything points toward a civilization obsessed with the heavens. But not in a naive or superstitious way. This was an obsession grounded in observation, in measurement, in the rigorous documentation of cycles. You look up. The sky feels impossibly clear. The stars arranged like points on a graph waiting to be interpreted. You try to imagine what it must have been like for the early astronomer priests who stood on the terraces of the ziggurat at dawn, charting the paths of celestial bodies across the horizon. Their calculations, recorded on clay, refined over generations, were precise enough to form the basis of later mathematical systems. But the tablets you saw earlier, the ones depicting the star with a tail, those were different. Those weren't cycles, they were anomalies. You walk deeper into the city, guided now by a compulsion you cannot quite explain. You pass a row of houses, each one stamped with faint symbols above their entrances. These markings repeat at intervals, forming a pattern you recognize from the tablets. You run your fingers across one of them, feeling the familiar indentation, the careful pressure of a stylus. The symbol appears again on the next house, but inverted, and on the next, elongated. You follow them like breadcrumbs, each variation suggesting a shift in meaning, a progression. Your steps draw you toward the outskirts of the city, where the buildings thin out and the darkness pools more deeply. The ground slopes gently downward until you come to a wide, open space. A platform of compacted earth sits at the center, circular and smooth. You step onto it slowly. A faint echo stirs in your mind. You have seen this shape before. Not here, not above ground, but below, around the central clay column. The similarity pulls your thoughts into alignment. The underground chamber is a mirror of this place, or this place is a mirror of the chamber. Either way, the duplication is intentional. You stand still, letting the idea settle inside you. A circular chamber with a central column underground. A circular platform with no column above ground. One hidden, one exposed. A memory preserved below. An observation enacted above. You begin to understand. This platform wasn't for ritual alone. It was for recording, measuring, watching the sky for changes, especially unexpected ones. You turn slowly, scanning the horizon. From this vantage point, the ziggurat aligns perfectly with the night's brightest star. You imagine ancient observers standing where you stand now, marking the exact moments when that star shifted position, when its alignment altered, when something else, something with a tail, entered the field of view. You can almost feel the excitement, the fear, the urgency that drove them back to the House of Tablets to carve their observations before memory distorted them. The star with the tail wasn't a myth. It was an event. Your breath slows as the implications ripple outward. What if the earliest stories of divine descent weren't metaphors? What if the gods who arrived from the sky were described in the only language these people had at the time? And what if those arrivals were cyclical, not divine intervention, but celestial recurrence? You close your eyes, tracing the logic in your mind. A civilization that observed anomalies in the sky, recorded them with precision, built structures aligned to celestial markers, encoded their city with symbols reflecting those observations, preserved a central, silent object as though it were a memory core. Your thoughts drift back to the clay column in the underground chamber. It was unmarked. Not because it held no meaning, but because inscribing it would limit that meaning. Perhaps it represented not a story, but a cycle. Not an event, but a return. A quiet chill moves through you. If the star with the tail marked the arrival of something, what marked its departure? You stand on the circular platform, letting the night gather around you. The silence of the city deepens. The air feels charged, not with threat, but with possibility. You take a slow step toward the center of the platform, and that's when it happens. A memory you can't explain rises unbidden. Not your memory, not anything you've experienced. Yet it feels familiar, like something whispered in the farthest recess of sleep. A vision of people gathered here at night, eyes lifted, breath held, waiting. A streak of light searing across the sky, growing brighter, brighter, until it halted, hung, descended. A soft exhale escapes you. You don't know if you're imagining it or remembering something carried in the collective memory of humanity. Something passed down not through stories, but through an instinct, an echo lodged in the spine. You step off the platform and continue walking, driven by a new urgency. The city seems to adjust around your movement, guiding you through passages you hadn't noticed before. Corridors that feel as though they only appear when the moment calls for them. Eventually, you find yourself standing before a structure unlike the houses or administrative buildings. It is smaller, more enclosed, more deliberate. A sanctuary, perhaps, or a place of instruction. You step inside. The interior is narrow but tall, the walls rising sharply toward a narrow slit at the top, where the sky peers through like an observing eye. Along the walls, you see markings etched into the clay, lines pointing upward, downward, intersecting faintly, forming angles that match the geometry of celestial paths. This is a teaching space, a place where knowledge was passed from one watcher to the next. You walk deeper into the narrow chamber, trailing your fingertips along the lines. Some angles represent solstices. Some represent planetary cycles. Some track the wandering star, the anomaly. And then you see it. A single mark at the bottom of the wall. A small wedge drawn beneath the tail star symbol you've come to recognize. It is not carved deeply. It is not repeated elsewhere. It is a notation, a conclusion, a hypothesis, or a warning. You kneel, studying the symbol with a growing sense of recognition. This mark has a meaning, not linguistic, not literal, but conceptual. Return. The word forms in your mind with startling clarity. Not arrival, not departure. Return. You rise slowly, the quiet shifting around you like a curtain of dust disturbed by movement. Every piece of the city now feels like part of a larger system, one that documented not just the world around them, but the sky above them, the cycles within it, the anomalies that punctuated those cycles. You walk back outside, standing once more beneath the ancient stars. Your mind drifts back to the clay column, the mirror platform, the alignment of the ziggurat, the urgent tablets, the chamber etched with the residue of fear, the symbol repeated in whispers across doorways. And you understand something with a clarity that feels less like learning and more like remembering. They weren't worshiping the sky. They were tracking something, preparing for something, preserving knowledge for a future moment, a moment when someone would need to understand. A quiet certainty gathers at the base of your throat. Something came before, something left, something was expected to return. And you are walking the same paths, standing on the same platforms, reading the same symbols they once built in anticipation of that return. You draw a long, steady breath, feeling the entire city inhale with you. The silence deepens, and somewhere in that silence, an ancient question begins to stir again. Bold this time, unavoidably present. What, exactly, were they waiting for? The night offers no answer, only the sense that you are closer than ever to the edge of something vast. a truth too large to reveal itself all at once. The mystery hangs quietly in the air, and the city feels alive with the weight of it. The night stretches around you like a vast, breathing canvas. The city feels different now, not abandoned, not ancient, but paused, suspended in a state of expectancy, as though every brick in every wall is listening to something you cannot hear. You walk slowly across the open space, the sense of alignment still humming quietly beneath your thoughts. The echo of that symbol, the star with the curling tail, follows you like a shadow. You turn toward a narrow street that seems to draw you in with a gentle pull. The houses crowd together more tightly here, their walls leaning inward as if to whisper secrets to one another. The air feels warmer, heavier with the dense residue of human life from ages past. You begin to feel as though you are stepping into a district that once held not only the physical work of the city, but its deepest, most intimate experiments with existence. It occurs to you slowly that for a civilization to track the heavens with such precision, for them to carve astronomical anomalies into clay with such urgency, their gaze must have extended far beyond the sky. They must have looked inward as well, into life, into the body, into the fragile architecture of flesh. You step into a courtyard tucked between the walls of several buildings. It is small, enclosed, almost private. The ground is a mosaic of packed earth smoothed by long use. At its center stands a rectangular basin carved from a single slab of stone, shallow but deliberate, its surface worn from countless hands. You kneel beside it instinctively, running your fingers along the subtle grooves inside the basin. These grooves weren't meant for decoration. They were purposeful. Channels for liquid. Pathways carved with intention. A quiet thought blossoms in your mind. This was a workspace, but not for crafting clay, for crafting life. You let your fingertips settle into one of the grooves, as though they might still carry the memory of what once flowed through them. Oils, herbs, blood, or something far more complex. The idea that the earliest stories of humanity's creation were woven here feels strangely plausible. Not because of myth, but because of the precision, the delicacy, the quiet engineering of these grooves. You rise slowly and step through an open doorway that leads into a dim interior room. The air is cooler inside, thick with the scent of old clay walls that have absorbed centuries of heat and human breath. The room is empty now, but you can sense its purpose. A table-like structure dominates the center, its surface broad and flat. The edges are carved with symbols. Some you recognize from the observational tablets, but others are unfamiliar, looping downward in graceful arcs. Your palm fits naturally against the smooth surface of the table, and a strange sensation washes over you. Not memory, something subtler. The sense of an environment where intention once shaped the world in ways you can barely grasp. You imagine figures standing around this table thousands of years ago, not in worship, but in concentration. Bowls filled with mixtures of substances, clay, blood, herbs, oils, seeds. The early ingredients of myth. But not myth in the sense of fantasy, myth in the sense of metaphor, the only language ancient humans had to describe processes too complex for words. You let your mind drift gently into that imagined past. You can almost hear the quiet, urgent exchanges of those early workers. Not gods, not mortals, but individuals standing on the threshold between biology and cosmology, crafting stories with the same tools they used to craft bodies. The creation myths of Sumer speak of beings formed from clay mixed with the blood of deities, shaped into workers designed to bear the burdens of the gods. You can't help but wonder now if that story is not a metaphor, but a memory, a distorted retelling of something once real. You trace the looping symbols again. These curves resemble the double helix shape you know from modern biology, not literally, but suggestively, as though the scribe was trying to capture the idea of intertwining forces, merging substances, the fusion of two forms into one. Your breath slows as a chilling thought presses gently against your mind. What if the earliest humans remembered their own creation? Not spiritually, biologically. Not in exact detail, but in story. The way children remember something they were told long ago. The meaning blurred, but the impression intact. You step deeper into the room, noticing a series of shallow alcoves carved into the walls. Each alcove contains remnants of small clay vessels, shattered or worn nearly smooth by time. You pick up a fragment, holding it carefully. Its interior is coated with a faint residue, darker than the surrounding clay. A stain left by something once stored inside. Something precious, something potent. A realization flickers inside you. This room wasn't a workshop. It was a laboratory, an ancient one. Not in the sense of glass tubes and microscopes, but in the sense of intentional creation. Controlled processes, repeated experiments, mixtures that required precision. The basin outside, the table here, the vessels, the grooves. All of them suggest a civilization that manipulated life with a kind of quiet expertise. The thought should feel outrageous, but instead it feels inevitable. You take a slow breath and step out of the room, re-entering the courtyard with its central basin. The stars above burn with cool light, and for a moment, you feel as though the entire universe is leaning closer, listening with you. You walk toward another building adjacent to the courtyard. Its roof has partially collapsed, but the interior walls remain intact. You enter carefully, and your breath catches. Unlike the other rooms, this one is covered wall to wall with carved figures. Not full-bodied depictions, but outlines, silhouettes, impressions of forms that seem almost human, yet subtly off. The proportions differ. The limbs extend too far. The heads tilt at angles not quite natural. Some figures appear merged with animals, others elongated, others compressed. A shiver runs through you. These are prototypes, or memories of prototypes. You walk slowly along the walls, studying each figure. Some appear elegant, others unsettling, others pitiably malformed. Each one seems to capture a moment in the evolution of an idea, a trial, an attempt, a version. You sense the desperation in some of the carvings, the precision in others. This was not idle art. This was documentation. A quiet dread begins to seep into your awareness. Not fear, but the understanding that these figures represent a story your species has long forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood. Your hand drifts along a figure with elongated limbs and a narrow torso. You imagine the people of Sumer encountering remains or memories of beings like this. Beings whose forms blurred the line between myth and body. You imagine them interpreting these forms through the language available to them, through gods, monsters, hybrids, chimeras. But perhaps these weren't gods or monsters. Perhaps they were attempts, experiments, iterations. You step back, letting the room sink into your mind. If the Sumerians inherited knowledge from another source, a source they described in their own language as divine, then perhaps this room represents their attempt to preserve the evidence of that inheritance. Or perhaps it memorializes the failures, the early, misguided paths taken, before something closer to humanity emerged. You move toward a darker corner of the room, where a single, larger silhouette dominates the wall. Unlike the others, this one is carved with exceptional detail. The shoulders broad, the posture upright, the proportions nearly perfect. Too perfect. The lines deliberate, clean, confident. This figure looks human. Not mythic, not monstrous. Human. Yet there is something unsettling about its presence, the way it stands, the way its head inclines slightly downward, as though observing whoever stands before it. You reach out and touch the outline of its face. A strange recognition stirs in you. An instinctive, unplaceable familiarity, like seeing a reflection in a mirror that isn't quite your own. You pull your hand away slowly. This was the breakthrough, the successful design, or the final attempt. The room shifts in your perception. You no longer see a sequence of random images. You see a progression, a timeline carved into walls, a record of creation, evolution, correction, a gallery of the steps taken to arrive at a form that could survive, adapt, reproduce, and build civilizations. You step back into the courtyard with a quiet, shaken breath. The basin, the vessels, the table, the silhouettes. This isn't myth. It is memory encoded in architecture. You walk along the narrow street again, the night wrapping itself around you like a heavy cloak. Your footsteps slow as pieces of the city's story begin aligning inside your mind, like stars forming constellations out of individual points of light. The tablets spoke of anomalies in the sky. The ziggurat aligned with celestial patterns. The underground chamber preserved a memory without words. And this district records the shaping of life. A truth unfolds slowly. The Sumerians weren't merely the first civilization. They were the first inheritors. Inheritors of stories, measurements, warnings, and perhaps something even more intimate, the blueprint of their own existence. You walk until the district recedes behind you, swallowed by the soft glow of ancient moonlight. There is no fear in your step, only a deepening sense of awe tinged with quiet unease. You understand something now, something the myths have hinted at for millennia. The creation of humanity wasn't a single event. It was a process, a sequence, an engineering undertaking disguised as divine intervention. And the earliest humans remembered it the only way they could, through stories of gods shaping clay, of divine blood mixed with earth, of beings descending from the sky to teach, command, and leave behind a species crafted in their image. You inhale slowly, feeling a strange calm settle inside you. The pieces are aligning, the pattern emerging, the truth approaching with steady, quiet steps. And as the night leans closer, you feel another question rise, heavier than creation, older than myth, more unsettling than the prototypes carved in clay. If humanity was shaped, why? The silence holds the question, and the city waits, as though the answer is buried deeper still, waiting for you to find it. You keep walking, though you're not entirely sure when the movement began. It feels as though something inside the ancient city has decided to guide your steps, softly, gently, without force. The air remains warm, but you sense a subtle shift, a deepening stillness that settles around you like an unseen presence waiting for you to reach a certain place, a certain moment. The narrow street widens again, opening into a rectangular plaza enclosed by low walls. It is quiet here, quiet even by ancient night standards. You pause at the edge, drawn toward a tall stone pillar standing alone in the center. Its surface is carved, but unlike the chaotic silhouettes of the laboratory district, this pillar carries order, geometry, precision. Its lines are straight, its symbols neat, almost mathematical. You move toward it slowly, as though approaching a sleeping animal. The carvings spiral upward in a single, unbroken band, the story unwinding like a helix around the stone. Your fingertips brush the first line, and your breath catches. These symbols are different, cleaner, more advanced than those in the other parts of the city. They feel as though they belong to a mind that functioned at a higher resolution. This is not a monument. It is an instruction, a guidepost. You trace the spiraling line, feeling the contours shift subtly beneath your touch. The story begins with a swirling pattern that looks like a seed, an idea forming. Then a burst of lines radiating outward. Then a figure descending from above, marked by the same star with tail symbol seen in the underground chamber. Your mind forms a quiet conclusion. This is the first teaching. The moment knowledge arrived, the moment someone came down. Yet the figure carved here is not imposing. It is tall, yes, distinct from the human silhouettes you've seen. But there is a softness in the carving of its posture, a humility in the way its hands are depicted, open, offering, as though inviting rather than commanding. You learn something from the stone, something subtle. The first contact wasn't domination. It was instruction. The story continues. The figure kneels beside early humans, beings still marked with elongated features, not yet refined. It places its hands over theirs, guiding them, showing them how to hold a tool, how to carve, how to shape clay not just into vessels, but into symbols, into writing, into preservation. A strange realization hums through you. Humanity did not stumble blindly into literacy. It was led there, gently. You follow the carvings upward, watching the narrative unfold. The figure teaches them to track the sky, to measure shadows, to plant seeds, to record the passing of seasons. These early humans are depicted growing straighter, stronger, more symmetrical with each level of the spiral, as though knowledge itself is reshaping them, refining their minds and bodies. You step back, feeling a strange warmth in your chest. You had always imagined ancient contact as dramatic, as beings descending in flashes of light or storms of divine power. But this story feels quieter, more intimate, less like a conquest and more like mentorship. A relationship built slowly, with intention. You move away from the pillar, letting the plaza open itself to you. On the far side, you notice a set of broad stone steps leading downward into a long, low-lying hall. You descend carefully, the air cooling with each step. This hall feels different from everything you've seen. Not chaotic like the laboratory, not anchored like the tablet house, not ceremonial like the ziggurat. It feels instructional. You step inside. Long benches carved from stone line both sides of the hall, arranged in rows. Some are cracked, Some collapsed, but many remain intact. At the far end stands a raised platform with a flat surface carved into the wall behind it. Smooth, dark, and slightly reflective. It takes you a moment to realize what you are seeing. This was a school, or something very close to it. Not for children, not for the masses, for a chosen few. You sit on one of the stone benches, running your fingers along its surface. It is smooth in the center where countless bodies once sat, but rough around the edges. The sensation feels startlingly familiar. You have sat in rooms like this throughout your own life, without ever imagining that their design could be older than civilization itself. A quiet thought settles through you. The structure of learning is ancient, perhaps older than humanity. You rise and walk toward the front platform. The reflective panel on the wall glints faintly in the muted light, and as you step closer, you notice faint carved lines near its edges. Thin grooves designed to hold something, though whatever once sat there has long since vanished. You imagine the scene. A figure, one of the first teachers, standing before a group of early students. Not preaching, not declaring, showing, demonstrating, drawing shapes in sand or clay, illustrating the movements of stars, explaining the shape of the world through metaphor, story, symbol, whatever language humans were capable of grasping at the time. A question forms quietly in your mind. Why teach? Why invest in a newborn species, incomplete and unrefined, fragile and short-lived? Why share knowledge that took millennia, perhaps eons, to gather? The hall offers no answer, only a sense of patience. You notice shallow indentations along the side walls, storage niches. Many still hold hardened lumps of clay etched with markings. You lift one carefully. The writing is primitive, wavering, not the refined cuneiform of later ages, but early attempts, practice lines, repetitions of symbols, half-formed ideas scribbled as learners struggled to master the art. You imagine their frustration, their excitement, their awe at the idea of capturing sound and thought in physical form. You return the tablet gently and continue exploring the hall. Beside the platform on the left side, the wall is covered with a mural, faded, cracked, but still legible. It shows a group of humans standing before two tall figures. One figure holds a sphere, smooth and polished. The other holds a long rod etched with symbols. The humans reach toward these objects with a mix of fear and longing. You lean closer. The sphere resembles the astronomical device from the underground chamber, the one that showed patterns far beyond human comprehension. The rod resembles the measuring tools used for tracking the stars. These weren't gifts of power. They were tools, teaching aids. You step back slowly, letting the mural imprint itself on your mind. The story carved here is not one of divine rule. It is one of guided progress. The teachers didn't force humans to worship. They taught them how to observe, how to record, how to think. Your breath draws in slowly as a deeper realization settles. The first temples were schools. The first priests were students. The first myths were memories, lessons wrapped in story to survive the erosion of time. You walk along the far wall until you reach a doorway leading into a smaller chamber. The air here is cooler still, and the walls are lined with shelves carved into the stone. Many have crumbled, but a few still hold remnants. thin clay tablets scored with lines, diagrams, and symbols. You lift one carefully. It is covered in precise drawings of human anatomy. Not perfect, not modern, but unmistakable. Muscles, bones, veins, organs. The proportions are slightly distorted, but the intention is clear. Someone was teaching early humans the structure of their own bodies. You swallow quietly. If you were a being introducing a species you had shaped, or reshaped, you would need them to understand themselves. You would need to explain the rules their flesh obeyed, how healing worked, how injury occurred, how life continued, how birth happened. You replace the tablet with care and move to another. This one holds diagrams of hands, multiple hand shapes, different palm structures, variations of finger length. Not artistic expressions, studies, variations, comparisons. Another tablet shows faces, broad, narrow, angled, rounded, a spectrum of forms. You pause as the truth becomes clearer. These weren't only teaching tools. They were observational records, notes on the early diversity of their creation, proof of refinement, iteration, adaptation. You stand in the center of the small room, the air pressing lightly against your skin. This wasn't a religious chamber. It was an early medical school, an anatomy lab, a place where knowledge of the human form was explored not out of worship, but out of necessity. You return to the main hall, feeling a newfound weight in your steps. The plaza outside feels larger now, as though the act of understanding has expanded the space around you. You look again at the spiral pillar. It no longer feels like an artifact. It feels like a milestone. A marker for the moment when humanity took its first step toward being something more than engineered workers. Something independent. Something aware. A quiet question rises within you. Did the teachers stop because their work was complete? Or because humanity reached a point where it needed to walk on its own? You stand in the plaza, letting the silence stretch. The ancient city feels alive, softly throbbing with memory, waiting for you to see something deeper beneath the surface of stories and carvings. You close your eyes for a moment. The image of the teacher figure remains behind your eyelids, the tall being kneeling beside early humans, guiding their hands, offering not commands, but understanding. A strange warmth spreads through your chest. For the first time in this long journey, you feel not unease or awe, but gratitude. Whoever they were, whatever they were, they cared enough to teach. You open your eyes again. And as the night deepens, another question forms, soft but insistent, rising through the quiet like a ripple through still water. If they taught us everything we needed to begin, what else did they leave behind for when we were finally ready to understand? The plaza holds its breath, and the ancient city waits as though the next truth is already close, hovering just beyond the edge of your awareness. You linger in the open plaza, the stone pillar still behind you, its spiraling story imprinting itself deeper into your mind. The night feels different now, less like a veil of darkness and more like an archive, a vast reservoir holding layer after layer of quiet truths. You walk slowly toward an arched corridor that leads away from the instructional hall, drawn again by that gentle pull you no longer question. The corridor curves in a long, graceful arc, its walls covered not with figures or silhouettes, but with shapes, lines intersecting in repeating patterns, circles carved with almost obsessive precision. notches that form sequences whose meaning flickers just beyond comprehension. You follow them with your fingertips, feeling the rhythm of the patterns. Straight, curve, straight, angle, circle, repeat. It feels mathematical, but not in the cold, modern sense. More like a visual song, a notation of the universe rendered in marks that bridge art and arithmetic. You walk deeper, your fingers gliding along the stone as if the patterns themselves are guiding you. Eventually, the corridor opens into another chamber, and the moment you step inside, you sense that this place belongs to a different kind of knowledge. If the last hall was dedicated to the body and to learning, this chamber belongs to the mind. And not merely the human mind as a universal construct. The walls are carved from floor to ceiling with long sequences of symbols, spirals, angles, repeated curves swirling into geometric motifs. But interwoven among those motifs, you see something astonishing. Familiar shapes, numbers. Early versions of the symbols that would one day evolve into the base 60 counting system of Mesopotamia. Wedges arranged in patterns that modern mathematicians still admire for their elegance. You stand very still. This is not the origin of mathematics. This is the inheritance of mathematics. The idea lands slowly, like dust settling into a quiet room. Humans did not invent the concept of measurement. They recognized it when it was shown to them. They shaped it into the base 60 system because someone had demonstrated that a circle can be divided perfectly, beautifully, with minimal remainder using 60. You move along the carvings, feeling the grooves deepen under your fingertips, as if the stone itself remembers the heartbeat of the first teachers. You notice a series of circles intersecting at neat angles, arrangements that look eerily close to what modern astronomy texts call conjunctions and oppositions. Not perfect diagrams, but unmistakably intentional, purposeful, aligned with the skies in ways that would be unthinkable for a culture just emerging from prehistory. You step back. Knowledge of the heavens, placed in the hands of early humans long before their eyes were trained to see it for themselves. A quiet thought unfolds. This wasn't a gift. It was a transfer. You walk toward the far end of the chamber, where a low stone table sits beneath a curved alcove. On the table rests a desiccated cluster of clay fragments, clearly once a large tablet, shattered by time or by someone's deliberate hand. You crouch and lift a piece gently. On it, a sequence of numbers arranged in 3 columns. You recognize the pattern instantly. You've seen recreations of it on modern blackboards. Yet seeing it here, in your hands, feels entirely different. A star calendar. Dates. Phases. Intervals. Recorded with a precision that modern scholars still puzzle over. You place the fragment back and pick up another piece. This one holds a different sort of entry. Measurements not of stars, but of land. Distances between riverbanks, depths of canals, angles for irrigation channels that create optimal flow with minimal effort. Knowledge not from the heavens, knowledge from the earth. A quiet realization moves through you. Whoever taught humanity did not only teach them to look up, they taught them to look down, to understand their world as an interconnected system, one vast body whose organs needed balance and harmony. You rise to your feet slowly, absorbing the weight of the room. Across the back wall, your eyes catch another set of carvings, this time clearly depicting humans alone. But now they hold tools. They measure. They write. They build. Their posture has changed. They stand straighter, not because their bodies are different, but because their minds are awake. The teacher figures appear only twice more on the back wall, both times standing at a distance, observing, watching, letting the humans work on their own. Then, for the final stretch of the mural, the teachers disappear entirely. You feel something tighten inside your chest. This is the moment, the turning point, the shift from guidance to independence. You step closer, studying the scenes. The humans build cities. They cultivate land. They create systems of law, trade, rituals. Each scene subtly emphasizes one detail. The humans are no longer being taught. They are remembering, repeating, innovating. The teacher's absence is not depicted as abandonment. It feels like graduation. But beneath that surface understanding, a deeper question whispers. Did the teachers leave? Or did humanity simply stop seeing them? You step back from the wall, suddenly aware of a faint trembling in your thoughts. Something like a thread connecting two distant ideas. The fragmentary star maps in the underground chamber, the anatomical records in the Hall of Bodies, the murals of early instruction, and now the mathematical and astronomical sequences. These are not isolated pieces. They form a lineage, a trajectory, a curriculum. It is an unsettling thought that the development of human thought, human society, human civilization might follow a pattern designed long before the first city rose out of the earth. You leave the chamber slowly, stepping back into the curved corridor. The air feels heavier now, dense with meaning. You walk without thinking, guided by something deeper than movement. The corridor eventually spills out into a long, open walkway that runs along the outer edge of the city. Beyond it, the land stretches into darkness, flat and endless. You stop, letting the quiet expand around you. For the first time tonight, the city feels less like a place and more like a memory. A memory built from stone, preserved not for worship, but for recognition. Every structure whispers a quiet message, one you can finally begin to hear. We did not build ourselves alone. You take a few more steps forward and find yourself standing before a wide terrace that overlooks a broad plain. In the distance, the faint outline of another ruin catches your eye. Smaller than the city around you, little more than a mound of broken stones. You walk toward it, drawn by a feeling deeper than curiosity. The structure is simple. 4 low walls enclosing a single empty space. No inscriptions, no carvings, no tools left behind. Just an open square with a slight depression in the center where the floor has sunk unevenly with time. It feels like a threshold, a place of departure. You stand in the center of the square and close your eyes. The wind brushes past you in a soft, lingering movement, as though carrying a memory. You imagine the teachers standing here long ago, watching the humans they had instructed build their first thriving city. You imagine them evaluating, deciding, sensing that the time had come to step back. Perhaps they felt pride, perhaps sorrow, perhaps a sense of purpose fulfilled. But another possibility flickers, unsettling in its clarity. They may not have left by choice. Your breath halts in your throat. You open your eyes slowly, staring at the empty square around you. The shape of it feels too precise, too deliberate to be just a ruin. It feels like a platform, not for teaching, but for transport, for arrival, for departure. for movement between worlds or states or dimensions you cannot begin to name. You imagine it activated, humming softly. You imagine a glow rising from the depression at the center. You imagine figures standing in that light, watching the horizon of human potential expand before them. Then you imagine the light fading and silence filling the space. You step out of the square carefully, your skin tingling with the echo of a possibility too vast to grasp fully. As you walk back toward the heart of the city, another thought blooms. Perhaps the greatest inheritance humanity ever received was not knowledge, but the capacity to learn without guidance. The teachers may have known this. They may have trusted it. They may have disappeared into the margins of myth, not because the work was complete, but because the next phase of human progress required their absence. You return to the plaza, where the spiral pillar stands. You look at it with new understanding. The story carved there is not the story of gods instructing mortals. It is the story of a species waking up. Guided, yes, but ultimately responsible for its own ascent. A quiet calm settles over you. There is one final truth forming, still soft at the edges, but unmistakably approaching. It is a question, but not one of fear. A question that carries both weight and wonder. If the teachers left because humanity became capable on its own, did they ever expect us to find our way back to them? The city holds its breath. The night shifts. And somewhere far above you, the stars tilt ever so slightly, as though listening. You remain still beneath the sprawling night sky, the last faint whisper of your thought dissolving into darkness. Did they expect us to find our way back to them? The air feels charged now, not with electricity, but with meaning, as if the city itself has paused to consider your question. You stand at the edge of that moment for a long time before beginning to walk again, letting your steps fall softly on the stone pathway that leads deeper into the heart of the ruins. The buildings grow taller around you. Their silhouettes rise like pillars of memory, each one echoing a different moment in the long ascent of human civilization. You pass through a narrow passageway carved with subtle indentations, traces of symbols that once held authority. Not teaching symbols, not astronomical diagrams, but something different, something sterner, something structural. You step into a broad courtyard lined with stone slabs carved into upright monoliths. At first glance, they seem decorative, but the closer you get, the more you see the truth. Lines of text cover every surface, rows upon rows of carved symbols that stretch from the ground to your shoulder. These are not myths or astronomical records. They are laws. A shiver moves through you. This is the place where memory became regulation, where teaching became governance, where guidance turned into control. You approach the nearest slab and run your fingers over the etched lines. The symbols feel sharp even after millennia, as though the hands that carved them pressed with a weight that went beyond the physical. The laws written here mirror ones you know from later civilizations. Rules of trade, property divisions, obligations between families, punishments for crimes. But woven subtly between these familiar structures are laws far older. Strange prescriptions about purity, about rituals at specific celestial hours, about offerings to unseen watchers. Some speak of maintaining the balance, others of honoring the first descent, still others of protecting the knowledge that must not be altered. You pause. These aren't simply legal codes. They are an attempt to stabilize a world in transition. This was the moment when the teachers stepped back and humans began trying to govern the inheritance left to them. For the first time in your journey, you feel a thread of melancholy radiating from the carved stone. Humanity was no longer being guided. Humanity was guiding itself. With imperfect tools, imperfect understanding, and a memory already beginning to blur at the edges. You notice something else. Many of these laws are not written in the refined, orderly script of the instructional pillars. They are carved with heavier strokes, less symmetry, more hesitation. Written by human hands, not teacher hands. You run your fingertips over the uneven lines. This is the shape of a species taking over its own story. You wander among the monoliths, reading fragments of forgotten ordinances, penalties, declarations. Some feel timeless, disputes over land, debts, contracts. Others feel alien, tables dictating ceremonial hours linked to the rising of specific stars you don't recognize. A few slabs contain warnings carved so deeply, the grooves still hold the essence of urgency. Do not disturb the chamber below the northern platform. Do not break the seals of the eastern archive. Do not follow the watchers beyond the horizon. You breathe slowly. Humanity was not only learning to rule itself, it was learning to contain what it did not fully understand. You step toward the far end of the courtyard, where a small raised platform stands. On it sits a single monolith carved with unusual precision, so refined it almost seems out of place among the others. The lines are symmetrical, the symbols delicate and balanced. You recognize the style immediately. A teacher carved this one. You lean closer, tracing the meaning as best you can. The symbols speak of harmony, of stewardship, of cycles that must be maintained. It is not a law in the human sense. It is more like a final instruction, a reminder, a quiet whisper of the world they intended you to build. But below those lines, carved in a different hand, rougher, more hurried, you see additions, human additions, interpretations, amendments. It hits you with startling force. The first misunderstanding. The moment where divine intention met human limitation and the meaning diverged like a river splitting around a stone. Humans saw the teacher's message as divine command, not practical guidance. They built ritual around it, ceremony, doctrine. You step back and look at the entire courtyard, the monoliths rising like an early attempt to cage meaning, to bind knowledge into rules. This is the birth of the priest, the birth of the intermediary, the birth of a structure meant to replace the direct presence of the teachers. A strange ache settles behind your ribs. They left, or stepped back, and humanity filled the empty space with order. You leave the courtyard, walking down a long stone ramp that slopes gently toward a structure half buried beneath the earth. The entrance is framed by a low arch. You duck inside, careful with your steps. The interior is cool and dark, the air thick with the scent of time. Your eyes adjust slowly. You find yourself in a room lined with stone benches arranged in a semicircle. At the center sits a single pedestal, its top flat, smooth, waiting. This feels like a council chamber, a place where decisions were made, but not by the teachers. The carvings on the walls confirm it. Humans sat here, debated here, argued here. The walls show scenes of heated discussions, figures pointing, gesturing, holding clay tablets, pleading their cases. They are not depicted as gods or heroes, but as leaders, burdened, exhausted, striving. They are inventing something new. The idea of authority that comes not from celestial beings, but from humans themselves. You sit on one of the stone benches. The silence is thick. You can almost hear the faint echoes of unresolved questions lingering in the air. Here, in this room, the world changed again. This was where the first rulers took shape. Not kings descended from the heavens, not intermediaries of gods, but humans attempting to steward the knowledge they barely understood. You sense the tension carved into the walls. There is pride, but also fear. A fear of losing control, a fear of misunderstanding, a fear of becoming unworthy of the inheritance, a tension that still exists today. You stand slowly, stepping toward the pedestal. For a moment, you imagine what might have rested upon its surface. Perhaps a fragment of an old teacher's tablet, perhaps a symbol meant to remind the council of the origins of their authority. But whatever it was has long since disappeared. You leave the chamber through a narrow exit that leads into a winding passage. The air shifts again, colder now, carrying a faint dustiness that gives the sensation of deeper age. You follow the passage until it opens into a circular room unlike anything you've seen yet. This room has no carvings, no pillars, no benches, just a single object. A round stone table with concentric rings etched into its surface. You run your fingers across the rings. They're perfectly symmetrical, each one slightly offset, like ripples captured inside stone. The outermost ring is fractured, pieces missing. The next ring is chipped in several places. Only the inner ring remains fully intact, smooth, whole. A strange understanding settles over you. This table represents eras, cycles, phases of human understanding. The outer ring, broken and eroded, is the age before writing. Knowledge preserved only through memory, fragile and easily lost. The next ring represents the age of myth and early law, stronger but still fractured by interpretation. The third ring represents the age of structured learning, the foothold of astronomy, mathematics, governance. And the inner ring, the unbroken one, is the part humanity has not yet reached, the part that still waits. You exhale softly. It feels like the table is asking you a question, a simple one, an impossible one. What will humanity do with the knowledge it has now? You leave the circular chamber in silence, moving through another archway that leads back into the open night. The stars have shifted overhead, tracing their slow, inevitable paths across the sky. You walk uphill along a sloping path until you reach a wide terrace overlooking the entire ancient city. From here, the city feels smaller. Not insignificant, just graspable, comprehensible. You see the instructional halls, the laboratory district, the council chambers, the monolith courtyard, and far in the distance, the great ziggurat you climbed earlier. The layout forms a pattern, not random, not accidental. A message written in architecture. Your breath slows as you begin to understand. Each district mirrors a part of the human mind. Memory, logic, emotion, curiosity, governance, creation. The city is not only a city. It is a map, a diagram, a blueprint of the human condition. You stand at the edge of the terrace as the realization pulses quietly through your awareness. The teachers did not teach humans what to think. They taught them how to think, how to observe, how to question, how to organize, how to build, how to govern. Everything that makes humanity human did not emerge from chaos. It emerged from structure, from intention, from design. You gaze across the ancient city and feel something shift inside you. Something that has been building slowly since you began this journey. You are not just uncovering history. You are uncovering yourself, your species, your inheritance, your place in a story older than any myth. A quiet voice inside you whispers, not a voice of fear, but of recognition. If humanity was taught the foundations of logic, the architecture of society, the language of the stars, the structure of the body, then perhaps the final lesson has not been learned yet. Perhaps the inner ring of the stone table waits for a mind ready to understand what the teachers left unsaid, what they left undone, what they left for humanity alone to discover. The night deepens, the city breathes, and the next question rises like a slow dawn. If the teachers stepped away to let humanity grow, what happens when humanity grows beyond even what they intended? The silence stretches wide, holding the shape of the question. And somewhere inside that silence, something begins to stir. You remain on the terrace long enough to feel the wind shift, as though the night itself is turning a page. The city below you looks almost fragile from this height. Its walls softened by age, its avenues blurred beneath the passing of centuries. Yet the deeper you stare, the more you sense the quiet tension woven through every structure. A tension between what was left and what was later added. You descend from the terrace slowly, following a path carved into the slope. The stones underfoot are smoother here, worn by generations of footsteps. But not all those footsteps belonged to students or scribes or skywatchers. Some belonged to rulers. To those who believed they inherited not knowledge, but authority. By the time you reach the path's end, the city has shifted again. You find yourself in a district you haven't explored, one tucked between high walls and narrow alleys, where doorways are small and deeply set into the stone. The air here feels heavier, denser, as though the space itself has absorbed conflicts the city never wanted to remember. You step into the first open courtyard and stop. At the center stands a tall, block-like structure. Not a temple, not a classroom. Something colder. Its walls are bare except for a single symbol carved above the entryway. A stylized eye set inside a triangle of intersecting lines. The shape is simple, but the feeling it carries is not. The eye does not watch the city. It watches you. You enter. The interior is dim, the space narrow and angular. Rows of benches line the walls, not wide enough to sit comfortably, too close to stand easily. You realize quickly that this isn't a place of learning. It is a place of listening. A place where people sat not to receive understanding, but to receive instruction. Fixed instruction. Prescribed interpretation. Accepted truth. You walk farther inside. The far wall is covered with a relief carving, more elaborate than any you've seen in the city so far. It depicts a human, one of the early rulers, standing tall atop a raised platform. Their arm is lifted skyward, but unlike the teacher figures carved elsewhere, this human does not gesture gently. Their posture is rigid, assertive. Their hand forms not an offering, but a command. Below them are the people, rows of figures carved in small, repeated lines. The uniformity is unsettling. Their heads are bowed, their arms pressed to their sides. A single gesture repeated hundreds of times. You trace the carving lightly with your fingertips. This is the birth of dogma. The moment when knowledge ceased being a gift and became something guarded. You take a step back, your chest tightening with a quiet understanding. The teachers left, or stepped aside, and humanity inherited a world filled with tools, knowledge, frameworks, but not with the wisdom to wield them flawlessly. And in that vacuum, certain humans rose who believed the knowledge was theirs to control. You leave the building and emerge back into the courtyard. There are others, structures built in similar fashion, each one marked with the same eye. You walk through the narrow lanes between them, feeling the air shift again. You enter another building, then another. What you find inside reinforces the same truth. These were the places where knowledge was repackaged, interpreted, simplified, restricted. You step into a larger hall at the edge of the district. Light filters through a long slit high in the wall. Stone benches are arranged in concentric rings around a central pillar, short, blunt, unadorned, nothing like the spiraling story pillar from the Plaza of Teaching. This pillar carries no story, only authority. You walk around it slowly. You can almost see the figures who gathered here long ago. Priests, judges, administrators, discussing what parts of the ancient teachings should be preserved and which parts should be hidden, softened, transformed. You imagine them debating not what is true, but what is useful. A quiet ache forms behind your ribs. This is where the distortion began. Knowledge once handed openly, knowledge once meant to empower, became something rationed, filtered through human fear, human ambition, human need for control. The teachers had understood the cosmos. They had understood the body. They had understood cycles, patterns, balance. But humans understood hierarchy. You run your hand along the cold surface of the central pillar. The marks here are faint, barely visible grooves. But when your fingertips follow them, you realize they once formed a series of symbols. Not instructions, warnings. Fragments remain. Do not twist what was given. Do not speak for those who came before. Do not claim what is not understood. These warnings were scraped away. You feel the absence more intensely than any carving you've seen. You step out of the hall and into the open air again, inhaling the cool night deeply. Something inside you shifts, a kind of recognition that feels almost like memory. You walk slowly toward a structure at the far edge of the district. It is larger than the others, its walls thicker, its doorway towering. This was not a school, not a courtroom, not a temple. It was a vault. You enter cautiously. The room inside is vast and empty except for a single stone pedestal at the center. On it rests a massive clay tablet, broken into 3 large fragments, their edges blackened as though someone tried to destroy them. You kneel beside the pedestal, lifting one fragment gently. The symbols etched into it are strange. Neither the refined clarity of the teachers nor the rigid strokes of later rulers. These marks feel transitional, caught between 2 worlds. The text tells a story of disagreement. It speaks of a schism among the early humans, those who believed the teachings of the visitors were sacred truth, and those who believed they were practical knowledge. Those who wanted to preserve the original message exactly, and those who wanted to interpret it for their own purposes. You read slowly, piecing the story together from symbols and feeling. Those who revered the teachers wanted the knowledge kept open, shared, unbounded. Those who feared losing control wanted it restricted. Those who misunderstood wanted it mythologized. Those who desired power wanted it weaponized. You set the first fragment down, your pulse steady but heavy. The second fragment describes the rise of intermediaries, humans who declared themselves translators of divine wisdom. They claimed that only they could interpret the remnants of the old teachings. Only they could decide what was allowed. Only they could speak for the silent spaces where the teachers once stood. Your free hand curls slightly against the stone. This is where hierarchy became sanctified. This is where doubt became forbidden. This is where curiosity became regulated. You lift the third fragment and read the last part of the story, perhaps the most haunting. Humans began rewriting the past, not maliciously at first, just out of fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of losing meaning, fear of admitting how little they understood. They filled gaps with stories. Stories became myths. Myths became doctrines. Doctrines became absolute truth. And slowly, the teachers, those luminous, gentle figures who knelt beside early humans, faded into legend, then metaphor, then ghost. You return the fragment to the pedestal and stand slowly. Something shifts in the chamber, not physically, inside you. The understanding is quiet and sharp. Humanity did not lose the teachers. Humanity lost the ability to recognize them. The moment the teachers stepped back, humanity rushed to fill the void, inventing structures to hold authority, rewriting knowledge to maintain control. And in doing so, the original message was buried under layers of interpretation. You step outside the vault, the night cool against your skin. The district feels still, as though it exhaled after holding its breath for thousands of years. You walk toward a staircase leading upward, back toward the higher terraces. The climb is long but steady. As you rise, you begin to feel the city changing again, shifting from a place of distortion to a place of clarity. At the top of the stairs, a wide platform waits. From here, you can see every district, learning, remembering, governing, distorting. And suddenly, the pattern becomes painfully clear. Every civilization replicates this arc, a period of awakening, a period of structure, a period of control, a period of forgetting. And then, sometimes in rare moments, a period of rediscovery. You inhale deeply, letting the wind pass over you. The ancient teachers had not simply left knowledge behind. They left clues, markers, locks waiting for the right minds to open them. And they trusted that one day, someone would look past the distortions and remember the truth. As you stand on the terrace, absorbing the weight of everything you've uncovered, a final question takes shape inside you. Quiet, steady, impossible to ignore. If humanity has spent thousands of years rewriting, limiting, and softening the original inheritance, what happens when someone finally sees the unfiltered truth again? The city holds the question gently, like something sacred, and the night deepens, waiting for your next step. You remain on the high terrace until the stillness becomes a kind of presence, as though the city itself is standing quietly beside you, waiting to see what you'll do with everything it has shown you. The wind moves gently around you, slow, dry, carrying the faint scent of clay that has been heated and cooled by centuries of forgotten suns. Beneath your feet, the stones hold an old warmth, like embers that never fully died. You begin walking again, leaving the terrace and descending along a narrow staircase carved into the rock. The air grows thicker as you descend. Not heavy, dense, as though saturated with the residue of ancient conversations, ancient decisions, ancient realizations that have clung to the stone for ages. You feel a quiet certainty forming in you, a sense that you are moving toward the oldest part of the city. Not in age, but in purpose. The staircase empties into a long, wide corridor. Its walls are bare. No symbols, no warnings, no decorations. The absence feels intentional. After all the complexity you've wandered through, this simplicity is almost startling. As you walk, you sense the corridor guiding you toward something foundational, something beneath every layer of history and misunderstanding that came later. The corridor ends in a large open chamber. You step inside, and the breath leaves you for a moment. This space is unlike anything you have seen. There are no carvings on the walls, no benches, no tools, no altars. Just an enormous circular floor made of smooth, dark stone, interrupted only by a single faint line etched around its perimeter. You step closer and realize the line is not a flaw. It's a boundary. Delicate, purposeful, impossibly straight. You walk toward the center. The air changes, subtly but unmistakably. Cooler, lighter, as if the space has been sealed from the rest of the world for far longer than the city above. You reach the center and find a shallow indentation barely the width of your foot. Its edges are perfect, clean, symmetrical, gentle. You stand on it. Something shifts. Not in the stone, not in the air, inside you. For a moment, you feel as though you are being aligned with something. Not a force, not a memory, a direction. As though the room is alive with vectors, invisible lines moving through it, converging where you now stand. You close your eyes. The sensation deepens. Not dizzying, not overwhelming, just precise. As though you have stepped into the exact point where millions of decisions, millions of fragments of knowledge, millions of forgotten thoughts all converge into a single, quiet truth. You open your eyes. The room looks unchanged, but you are not. You begin to understand the purpose of this place. This wasn't a temple. It wasn't a laboratory. It wasn't a council. It wasn't a school. It was the origin point. The place where the first answers were given. And the place where all future questions were meant to return. Your pulse softens, slowing as the thought forms more clearly. This room was designed to reset the mind, not to erase it, not to overwhelm it, but to bring it back to a state of unfiltered clarity, the way the earliest humans might have experienced the teachers. Before fear, before power, before distortion, before dogma. You take a step backward, feeling the subtle shift in air pressure as your foot leaves the indentation. A faint sadness touches the edges of your awareness, as though the room itself mourns how long it has been since anyone stood here with intention. You begin walking along the edge of the circular floor. After a few steps, you notice something you didn't see before. Small, nearly invisible marks carved into the boundary line. You kneel and touch them. They are shallow, almost erased by time, but you recognize the shapes. These are not instructions. They are not warnings. They are questions. You read the first one slowly, tracing the symbol with your thumb. Where does knowledge begin? You move to the next. What creates the desire to understand? Then another. What must remain unknown for growth to occur? You feel a quiet ache blooming in your chest. These weren't questions the teachers asked humanity. These were questions humanity began asking itself when the teachers stepped back. You walk the full circle slowly. Every set of marks, the same. Not statements, not rules. Questions. A living perimeter of uncertainty. The chamber was not built to explain. It was built to provoke, to awaken something that had begun to fade. You step back to the center, standing on the indentation again, letting the silence deepen. You sense something shifting in the distance. Not physical, but conceptual. A slow unfolding of understanding, like a scroll being gently unrolled in your mind. Humanity never lost the ability to learn. It lost the ability to question without fear. And this room was meant to protect that ability, to anchor it, to safeguard it from the structures built above, from the laws, the dogmas, the misinterpretations, the authority of those who believed they alone had the right to define truth. You breathe in slowly. You begin to understand something more unsettling. The teachers did not leave because humanity was ready. They left because humanity needed to be unobserved in order to develop independent curiosity. Under direct guidance, humans would imitate. Under distance, humans would invent. You stay in the center until the weight of the thoughts settles inside you like a stone in calm water. Then another realization rises, a quiet, fragile one. Humanity eventually stopped asking the questions carved into the boundary, not because the answers were found, because the questions made people uncomfortable. It is easier to rule than to inquire, easier to inherit interpretation than to search for meaning. You leave the center, feeling a gravity tug at you, not pulling you back, but asking you to return someday. You walk toward a small opening in the far wall. It leads to a narrow, spiraling passage that slopes upward. The air grows warmer and thinner as you climb, as if you're ascending toward the city's outer consciousness. When you emerge, you find yourself standing atop a low plateau on the city's edge. The sky stretches above you with impossible clarity. The stars feel close, closer than at any point in your journey, as though the air itself has thinned enough for you to feel their presence directly. You sit on the stone, letting the night settle around you. A new question begins to form, not carved into stone, not left by teachers, not inherited, one born inside you. You realize it carries the same weight, the same quiet resonance as those etched into the circular chamber. You listen to it form itself, word by word, slowly, gently, like a whisper rising from the deepest part of your consciousness. If humanity has forgotten how to ask the questions, who will remind it? You let the thought expand. You imagine a species that has grown in power, in ambition, in knowledge, yet also in distance from its origins. A species that builds machines that think, but forgets how to think with humility. A species that explores the stars, but struggles to explore its own fears. A species that has learned to engineer reality, but still has not learned to understand itself. The breeze shifts. You sense the city listening, as though you have spoken aloud. You look at the stars, remembering the spiraling pillar, the laboratory walls, the courtyard monoliths, the erased warnings, the distorted teachings, the mathematical sequences, the anatomical diagrams, the silent column, the lightless platform, the council chambers, the forgotten vault, the circular room of questions. A single truth threads through them all. Knowledge was never the point. Understanding was. The teachers didn't give humanity answers. They gave it the capacity for self-discovery. But somewhere along the way, something broke. Not permanently, just enough that the questions grew faint and the silence grew loud. You rise slowly, feeling the night gather behind you. The city stretches below like a map of human intention. Bright where we learned, dark where we feared, silent where we misunderstood, enduring where we forgot. You begin walking again along the plateau's edge, feeling as though the journey is nearing something, not an end, but a threshold. A thought flickers softly. Maybe humanity is closer to the truth now than it has ever been. Not because of power, not because of progress, but because the silence has grown uncomfortable again, because the questions are returning, because the old patterns are beginning to stir. As you walk toward the descending path that leads back into the city, another realization forms. Quiet, delicate, undeniable. The greatest secret the teachers left behind was not hidden in any chamber. It was hidden in the unfinished parts of humanity itself. And you feel the city shift around you, as though preparing you for the next revelation waiting somewhere deeper in the dark. You follow the descending path as it curves gently away from the plateau, moving back toward the quiet shapes of the sleeping city. Yet something is different. The stones feel warmer under your feet, as though the ground itself remembers what you just understood and is carrying that memory with you. The air carries a subtle tension, the kind that precedes a shift, like the moment before a door opens, or a word is spoken that cannot be taken back. You walk slowly, letting the night guide you. Somewhere deep within the city, a memory stirs. Not your memory, its memory. The memory of a civilization that once stood on the precipice of a transformation so vast that even the gods grew uneasy. A transformation that was interrupted, redirected, forgotten, and then buried beneath myth. You feel drawn toward the heart of the city, though no path is visible. You simply walk, and the city rearranges itself around your steps, guiding you to a place you have not yet seen. A narrow passage reveals itself between two sloping walls. You slip inside without thinking. The passage twists like a river, turning your orientation until you lose all sense of direction. When you emerge, you find yourself standing in what feels like the oldest part of the city. Older than the ziggurat, older than the tablet house, older than the memory chamber, older even than the foundations of the first settlements. This place existed before architecture had names. You take a breath. The air feels heavier, not oppressive, but charged, as though 1,000 unspoken truths linger here, waiting for someone willing to stand in their presence. You walk forward. At first, it looks like ruins. Broken walls, shattered stones, collapsed columns half swallowed by the earth. But as your eyes adjust, you recognize something else entirely. The stones are not broken. They were dismantled deliberately, as if taken apart with meticulous care. The collapse is too precise, too symmetrical to be accidental. It's the kind of destruction that only occurs when a civilization decides to bury something not with violence, but with regret. You step deeper into the ruins. A faint glow lingers on the stones, not literal light, but a residual impression, as though ancient thought still clings to the surfaces like dust. You run your fingers along the edge of a fallen slab. It tingles faintly under your touch, a whisper of recognition, a ghost of intention. You walk until you reach an area where the ground dips downward into a vast, circular depression. It reminds you of the memory chamber, circular, deliberate. But this one is different. Here, the floor is absent. A cavity yawns open, shaped with such perfect geometry that time has failed to distort it. You stand at the rim. For a moment, you simply breathe, letting the stillness settle around you. Then the thought arrives quietly, like a truth that had been waiting for you to notice it. This was the first project. Not the city, not the temples, not the tablets, not the technology. This was where something else began, something humanity was never meant to forget, and yet, somehow, did. You move along the rim, studying the smooth, precise curvature. A sense of anticipation rises in you, as if the ground beneath your feet is gently drawing your attention toward a specific point. At the far end of the circle, half buried beneath earth and centuries, you see a block of dark stone. You kneel in front of it. Its surface is blank. No symbols, no carvings, no indicators of purpose. You brush some dirt away, expecting to reveal markings underneath, but the stone remains smooth. And yet, the moment your hand rests fully on it, something opens in your mind. Not a vision, not an image, a direction, an axis aligning your thoughts like a compass needle. You feel the faint weight of responsibility settling on your shoulders, not imposed, not demanded, offered. As though the stone is gently asking if you're ready to remember what has been forgotten. You stand slowly, and as you do, you notice faint lines beginning to rise on the stone's surface. They emerge like condensation on glass, coalescing into shapes that feel familiar even though you've never seen them before. Circular patterns, spirals, converging vectors. Not language, not art. Instruction. A map of intention rather than place. You lean closer as the lines sharpen. The spirals converge at a central point, and in that point is a single, small marking. Simple, unassuming. It's a question. Not the ones carved in the memory chamber. This one is older, deeper. What is the purpose of a species that can question its own purpose? You feel a chill move through you. Not fear, not discomfort, but recognition. The kind of recognition that reaches past the boundaries of memory and into something more foundational. You close your eyes. A thought forms, slow and deliberate. The teachers didn't come to give humans knowledge. They came to see what humans would do with the capacity for knowledge. Creation was not their experiment. Curiosity was. The stone responds to your realization. The lines shift slightly, as if acknowledging your understanding. Then they begin to fade, sinking back into the stone as though they were never there at all. You open your eyes fully, the night around you sharper now. Another realization surfaces. This was not a lab, not a council, not a school, not a shrine. This was the first question humans ever asked themselves, and the stone was the answer. Not literal, conceptual. A silent reminder embedded in the foundation of civilization. You are not meant to receive truth. You are meant to become worthy of finding it. You sit down on the rim of the depression, feeling the gravity of the idea settle into place. Humanity did not lose its teachers. Humanity lost its willingness to challenge the boundaries of its own understanding. The silence deepens. You begin to see how the timeline unfolds in ways you hadn't noticed before. How the myths, the symbols, the distortions, the divergences all share one common thread. The tension between seeking certainty and embracing uncertainty. Certainty is comforting. Uncertainty is transformative. You breathe slowly. For a moment, everything becomes clear. The ruin around you was never meant to be rediscovered physically. It was meant to be rediscovered conceptually. Not through archaeology, through awakening. You rise again and walk back toward the passage that led you here. But as you step among the dismantled stones, you realize something subtle. None of this feels like abandonment. It feels like preparation. Like a civilization carefully disassembling a tool before moving on to the next phase of evolution. Not erasing its past, protecting its future. You continue walking, letting the ruins fade behind you. When you reach the narrow passage, a thought slips into your mind like a soft whisper. Perhaps the greatest myth humanity ever believed was that it had been left behind. You pause in the passage. An idea flickers inside you, quiet but insistent. What if the teachers didn't disappear? What if they withdrew because the next stage of human development required precisely what humanity feared most? Freedom. Not guided freedom, not supervised freedom. True freedom, the kind that forces a species to confront its own potential without being told what to do with it. You step out of the passage and re-enter the main city. The sky feels different now, as though the stars have come closer, pushing against the edges of the night. You walk through the silent streets, noticing the subtle shift in your perception. The ziggurat no longer looks like a throne. It looks like a milestone. The tablet house no longer looks like an archive. It looks like a mirror. The memory chamber no longer looks like a mystery. It looks like a reminder. You walk until you reach the open square at the city's center. A faint breeze moves through the space, carrying the sense that the city is waiting for you to take the next step. Not physically, conceptually. Something inside you settles, a clarity that feels earned, not given. You understand now. This entire journey has not been about discovering what the teachers were. It has been about discovering what humanity was meant to become. A species capable of carrying forward a legacy of curiosity, but also mature enough to reshape that legacy into something new. A species not designed to imitate creators, but to surpass them. A species whose defining trait is not obedience or power or intelligence, but the capacity to transform questions into evolution. You feel the night around you expand, as if making space for what you just realized. A whisper forms in your mind. Not a voice, not a memory, not a message. An intuition. You are not here to uncover their story. You are here to continue it. The silence stretches wide and deep. Somewhere in the city, a new direction is waiting to reveal itself, and you can feel it already gathering at the edges of your awareness. The next threshold, the next ancient fragment waiting to challenge everything you think you know. And as you take a breath and step forward into the quiet, you sense that the path ahead will not just change your understanding of the past. It will change your understanding of what humanity is still destined to become.